Hello, everyone out there in podcast world. Hope you're having a great day. You're listening to the Service Business Mastery Podcast. I'm your host, Tersh. I wanted to preface this conversation, this video, with that we did a great and awesome video this morning. It was a live video that we had some issues on Facebook where the connection kept cutting in and out. So I decided to record it and then post it afterwards on Facebook and YouTube. But want to give a special shout out to Mary Lent with ThermoGRID. She set this whole thing up, and honestly, it wouldn't have happened without her taking charge and making sure that happened. Adam and I were both extremely busy people, and she's that person that makes sure that everything really make sure that happens. So thanks for doing whatever. I'm not going to say bugging me. Definitely consistently reminding me that it was time for us to get started with this show. But anyways, this is exciting, very exciting live conversation that we had. We had a great audience, and there were people that were on the Zoom call that were asking questions also, which was really awesome. And we had a great conversation about the top 4 KPIs you should be watching daily within your business. And we did a little bit of rabbit holing and going off topic and some opinions on Adam's past experiences. And a little known fact, Adam coaches also. He does a little coaching within ThermoGRID, so his clients, they can receive some coaching with because of his experience, extensive experience as a manager, salesperson, technician, everything. And so with that being said, I hope you enjoy the show. Cool. So welcome to the show. For anybody who doesn't know Adam Cory, we've developed a relationship over the past, it's been about 6 months or so since we first met. But something that I learned about you when we first met, I first interviewed you on the podcast, was that you designed a CRM platform, but that wasn't your intention. Like you didn't go out and say, hey, let's design a CRM. Like, I'm getting out of college, I'm going to design a CRM platform. That wasn't the whole intention of that. You were actually working with people, and this was the solution to the problems that they were having.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it was even maybe a little bit more selfish than that. It was for me.
Okay.
So
right.
I basically
did that. Yeah.
Yeah, I spent about 4 hours per day basically doing paperwork on creating estimates and ordering equipment and looking everything up. And so that's really how it started, was just to make my paperwork time go down to like less than 30 minutes a day.
Oh, sweet. And you originally were doing all this stuff on Excel, and then that just it had to morph into what it is now in order to help serve your clients better. Really quick, anybody that may be watching this live here on Facebook, be sure that you comment on that. Hang on, sorry y'all. On the original post, not anything that's shared, because otherwise I won't see the questions if somebody happens to have a question. But if you have a question, don't hesitate to ask. And if we have a second, we will definitely answer it. And if not, I'll answer it, and we'll share it with you after the fact. But today we are going to talk about the I said 4, 5. Is it 5?
4.
4. Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought. 4 KPIs that we should be watching every day. In my notes, I wrote down 5, but I knew that when I said it out loud, I was like, I don't think that's right. Yeah. So yeah, the 4 KPIs that you should watch every day to make sure that your business is operating properly. And I'm super excited about this because there's KPIs that I watch, but then at the same time, I feel like, am I doing this correct? Like, should I be doing this different? And so I'm really super stoked to hear what you have to say about it. And I guess with that being said, for anybody who doesn't know who you are, please just do a quick introduction of who you are, what your role is, and how you got to where you are right now.
Sure. Yeah. So, again, I'm Adam Cory, and I started out as a technician working in the field, installing heating and cooling equipment, boilers, geothermal, all sorts of stuff. So that's where everything kind of started. And again, as I was working through those positions, I kind of worked my way up from being a technician to being a comfort advisor, doing the sales side of it, sales manager, and then I took over as general manager. And that's how all this started with the software, was finding ways to make things more efficient, reduce the error, increase the profitability in the success of the overall organization. And over time, a lot of people started kind of hearing about what we had going on and how things were working, and they became very, very interested in what we had. So that's where everything kind of transitioned from using Excel spreadsheets into an actual software, and kind of helping coach businesses to achieve the same sort of levels of success. And that's something that's kind of continued over time. So I now have ThermoGRID software that is the field service management software. A lot of different businesses, from plumbing, HVAC, electrical, roofing, landscaping, use that product to do the same thing that we did with our business. So
Cool.
yeah.
So with that being said, it's for anybody that's listening and maybe watching this, we actually have recently transitioned over into ThermoGRID, and I really love the platform because of how much of a coaching aspect it takes with us as clients. Also, so you're able to watch some of these KPIs at the same time, it's like your goals and everything that you want set up. I think that's one of the best things. One of my favorite things so far, after just playing with it, is like you're able to set your daily goals and base those off of monthly goals and tracking it. Could you dive a little bit deeper into that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to do with the platform was make it easy to know where you're at as a company, and make it easy to set goals as well. Because when I was in the management position and we were setting goals, it was pretty challenging, and we would always forget to do our goal setting. So we'd be a week into the month already and don't even have goals yet. And it was hard to manage the different goals between, senior technicians versus, beginner technicians, maintenance technicians. So we built the platform to make it where it'd be very simple for people to know where they should be based on what level of a technician they are, or a comfort advisor, or even a dispatcher. So there's these different levels, and it keeps it in front of them. So they don't have to know what they are. They're automatically there, and it'll show you where they're at with every KPI versus their goal. So you can basically hover above them. It says this is where they should be, but this is where they're at. And it changes colors. So if they're, below minimum expectations, it's going to be red. If it's above expectations, but below the goal, it's yellow. And then above goal, it's green. So nice visuals for people to know just on a daily basis by looking. They don't have to run any reports, anything like that. So that was another thing we had challenges with in our platform we were using. We had to run reports every day, and it was like 15 reports just to figure out the numbers we really wanted for our business. So, we're spending hour, maybe even 2 hours sometimes,
Absolutely,
running reports to calculate numbers.
Yeah, I agree. And it's crazy whenever you do something like that, how much effort and mental capacity that you're spending doing that. Whereas you've straight automated all that process. So that's an awesome thing. So with that being said, let's dive down into these KPIs that we should be watching every day. Number one, what do we have on our list for number one?
So when we first started thinking about this, my first thought was net profit.
Yeah.
That's number one. That's
Yeah.
the biggest key performance indicator we could ever look at. But since we decided that we were going to go with 4 for today, I looked at, if I was to do 4 different KPIs, I would do the primary KPI for each department, performing department. And the first thing that I thought of was a big challenge that comes up all the times when we look at companies that start on ThermoGRID and maybe on the coaching side, is they become aware of things that they didn't know before. And that's the call conversion ratio. So there's a lot of companies that they feel like they need more marketing, and they spend a lot of money on marketing already. And sometimes they feel like they're doing very well with this. Every company I ask them, I'm like, how well do you guys convert the calls that are coming in? Everybody says,
Oh,
we're like
100%.
100.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're 100%. I'm like, no, there's no way you are. But they're 100%. And then I'm like, well, what about those calls when the client calls in and they say that, how much is your diagnostic fee? And then they're like, okay, thanks, I'll call you back. And they don't call you back. They're like, well, those don't count. Those are just price shoppers.
Yeah, well, that is part.
Right. So call conversion ratio, if that's something that is actually measured, usually when people think they're 100% and then they start to actually measure it, like through ThermoGRID, you can actually see usually they're under 50%. So if you think about this, I mean, you spend so much money on marketing to get people to call you. It's very expensive to get people to call you for service and estimate.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And if you're only booking half of those, the way I think about it and the way I tell some of our clients is that all that money you spent, half of the money you're spending basically is to grow your competition, because they're getting the work done.
Oh yeah. I didn't even think about it like that. Like,
So it's
if
very,
you have like 50% conversion rate, then or call booking rate, then you're very much paying so that your competitors can grow.
yeah. So usually when we make that kind of comment, people start to take a step back and think, okay, this might be a little more, serious than what we thought. So knowing where they should be though is pretty important. Like when somebody's calling in for an estimate, it's most companies out there give a free estimate because there's so much to gain by earning that client's business. So
Yeah, absolutely.
they give a free estimate. You should be able to book over, 98% of those appointments. Once in a while, you're going to have a client that may not be a good fit. Maybe they don't want somebody coming out and taking measurements to figure out what size the system is required, and, taking all those steps versus just getting that price over the phone. But there's little things that you can say during the phone conversation to really build that value and transfer that value over to that client to make them feel a little more curious about, well, why do you guys need to come out? You're taking measurements. Why did the other company not take measurements? And that's how you go out and actually design a system that will be very, very good for the client.
Yeah, and the worst thing in the world is to sell a system just like for like. So you had a 3-ton in here before. Let's just go back with a 3-ton, and then you're hoping and praying that the previous installer, did a heat load calc on it, or like designed the ductwork properly. Anything, and one of the things that I would like to preface this before I ask this question is improvement from yesterday is our goal. So whatever your KPI is now, whatever your call booking percentage is right now, your ultimate goal is to improve on it tomorrow. But with that being said, what would you say is a good call booking percentage?
So if it's an inbound sales estimate, I think 98 is definitely the target, 98%.
Okay.
For service, if it's more of a slower season, then the target should be about 92%,
Okay.
95%, somewhere in that range. But ultimately, when there's, it's 100 and some degrees outside and there's a huge backlog and you guys are booked out multiple weeks, that does add an extra element to getting clients to wait for you. And then typically, if it is that demand season where you are booked out multiple weeks, you really want to be pushing still for over 85% conversion ratio on those appointments.
Okay. So with that being said, what do we add in spammers to that percentage, or is that an unbookable call?
The percentage is just people that are actually calling you for And it's really any inquiry, like how much is your diagnostic fee? They obviously have some sort of service needs that they need. So that counts. So if they're calling it, it's an existing client saying, hey, I just wanted you to look up what was the model number of our system or something. Obviously that doesn't count as
Yeah.
an estimate or anything like that. But anybody that has an inquiry related to services or estimates of any kind, that is what counts in the call conversion ratio.
Okay. So, let's see here. What about if they are calling back to, if they have a question about the call that they were, like they have a tech that's there? I mean, so what I'm asking is, does somebody have to actually go through and basically needs to listen and classify these calls in order to make sure that they, so if like somebody calls in and says, hey, your tech's on the way here, I'm waiting for them, where are they at? That's not really a bookable call. I mean,
Right.
it's already booked.
It's already an opportunity. So
Yeah.
one appointment counts as one opportunity. One client is one opportunity. So typically companies that, performing companies, they do a high level of like customer service for their clients. So they'll
Yeah.
book the appointment, they'll call and maybe confirm the
Yeah.
appointment. They have the automatic messages to confirm it. They call when the technician's on the way, maybe. All of these things for multiple reasons, but it's still one opportunity. It's not 4 opportunities.
Yeah.
And in ThermoGRID, you can really track that by putting in like, this was a vendor that called in, telemarketer that called in, because that's important to know too, is overall calls that are coming in, just to know like what your staff needs to be to support the call volume coming in, or make sure the vendors are actually calling the right number instead of the main line that the clients need to be calling in. You don't want vendors tying up that line, or technicians for that matter.
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is that we need to be giving vendors and people or service technicians a different phone number to be calling the office instead of your main line.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you have 5 technicians calling at the same time for the next appointment, but clients are trying to call too, now you just lost those clients. You don't even get to speak to them.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's really cool. So how about number 2?
So the second one that I was thinking of would be on the sales side of it. So the number one sales KPI that I look at is dollars per lead. And what that basically means is if you have 10 appointments, let's say, and out of all the 10 appointments ran, regardless of which ones you sold or didn't sell,
Mm-hmm.
let's say the total revenue that was brought in was $40,000.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 40,000 divided by 10 total opportunities equals $4,000 per lead. And that's a good KPI to be looking at, because what it does is it looks at the combination between 2 primary things that most people look at, which is the closing ratio and the average ticket. So some people, they always look at the closing ratio and they're like, well, we're closing like, 75, 80%. We're really good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you look at the average ticket, and the average ticket's like $4,000. That's not that good.
Right.
That's a really, really low average ticket. So when you look at the dollars per lead, what it does, it helps you stay in line on both sides to know if there's a challenge on one side or the other. So you can dig in and improve that.
Okay. So what if you're being extremely aggressive for your getting leads to come in? So we have, some lead generating services out there that you pay extra to get leads. And anybody that's run those can feel my frustration whenever I say that they are not always the best leads that they're going to, and they're just like, let's call everyone because we know it's free to come out. How do you handle that? I mean, because as a salesperson or a comfort specialist or whatever you call them, they're going to be like, wait a minute, I'm being penalized because of these trash leads that we know are trash leads before we ever pay for these trash leads,
So here's what I'll say about that. I have a way different philosophy than most people do when it comes to like good leads and bad leads.
Okay.
Have you ever seen the movie Glengarry Glen Ross?
I have not. Let me write that
I'd
down.
say anybody that's in sales, watch that movie. There's a little bit of language in it, but it's Alec Baldwin's in it from back in the day. It's classic because every sales team I've ever worked with always talks about good leads and bad leads.
Okay.
And so when I was going through the sales position, and I was a comfort advisor, one of the things that we did as a company was, if a technician generated the lead for me, they got 3% of my commission right off the top. So the most that I could make is 9%. So if it's a tech lead, they get 3%. I only get 6% commission. That's not a lot when you're a commission only comfort advisor. So what I started looking at doing is figuring out, why do people think these are all bad leads, the marketed leads? And I'm asking that question because I would make 9% on those.
Right.
So
So you actually get 3% more if you close them.
exactly. So I started thinking, why are they such bad leads? And they're calling a lot of people, right? So there's a lot of competition, but I'm a very competitive person, and I'm all about, getting first place, not second or third or anything like that. So what I did is I developed a process that has a lot of psychology built into it for sales side of it, because to me, it's all about belief, right? Whatever you believe is going to happen is pretty much what's going to happen, right? Because if you believe that you're not going to get it, the amount of actions that you take to make it happen are going to be significantly less than if you truly believe you should be getting it. So I think it all starts with the believing that you should be able to close those, and that they are good leads, or the Glenn Gary leads.
Yeah.
Which after going through that process, just to give you an example, the way that we counted our leads is, if somebody opened the door, it counts as a lead.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Nothing else matters. If you get anybody with a pulse, and even if it's only one decision maker versus all of them, even if they don't have enough time, they only give you like 30 minutes. Well, the job as a sales rep is to get enough time, to build enough value that the client wants to give you the necessary time that it takes to go through and present all of their options. It's your job to make sure that you get all the decision makers there, to make sure that you can close it. And maybe they don't even need to be there. Maybe you can just get them on the phone. But my last 3 years in sales, I was at 83% closing. 80% of the leads that I ran were marketed leads. So all the bad leads that everybody thinks that are there, I found out that they're not so bad. I could make more money on them. I could actually close them higher, because what I truly believed was, these are clients that were calling in that had plenty of time to think about what they needed. See, on a tech lead, when we go out there and we find failure, they had no idea that they needed a new system. I mean, we kind of dropped the bomb on them. But if we can close them without any preparation or thinking at all at 85%, why can't we close these people that have had plenty of time to think about it? So just changing the belief of what it looks like on the sales side, you'd be surprised at what can actually happen to the closing ratio. But here's the problem that we ran into, because there's always pros and cons of everything. So we create this sales process. And what happened was, all my comfort advisors were now using this sales process because it was extremely effective. Now no comfort advisors want to run tech leads.
Oh yeah. And so then the techs are like, what do you want me to do? I totally get that. That's like a tech catching another tech's callback and then not get, totally. I got it.
So we ended up having to throw another solution in there that, as long as the comfort advisor could sell it for a certain gross profit, then they got their commission back. So the technician got paid and they got their commissions back.
Okay.
So there's always a solution to any challenge, I feel. And there's definitely a solution to make it where you walk in the home, you can feel very comfortable counting that as an opportunity. And as that being an opportunity, the KPI that we're really looking for is over $4,000 per lead.
Okay. Cool.
So typically that averages out to be more like maybe like around $7,000 average ticket, and, a 60-70% closing ratio typically. But usually people that will follow a good solid process to close all the doors, they should be able to close over 63%. Doesn't matter if it's a marketed lead, a tech lead, they should easily be able to average out over 63% as more of a minimum type expectation.
Okay. So if you are a comfort specialist and you're listening to this, or comfort consultant, and you're closing 75%, but if you did the math and you're over, and your lead, average lead, dollars per lead, sorry, is like 2,000, then how could you go to how could you lead from the bottom up? How could you go to your upper management and say, hey, look, my dollars per lead are $2,000, but my average, I'm closing 85% of the jobs.
Yeah, but when you give things away, you can close anything, right? Because that's ultimately what somebody's doing. If they're at 75% closing ratio with a $2,000 per lead, they're giving it away. Their prices have to be maybe kind of average for the market or even lower. You know, the best contest that somebody can set in the department, because clients buy value. Like when you walk into their homes, it's like a new standard, right? You always see like a 50-inch plus TV hanging on the wall.
Yeah.
There's cheaper TVs than that. Why did they spend more money to get that 50 plus inch hanging on the wall? So everybody has hot buttons. They all have reasons for why they do what they do and choose to buy it. The more that you understand why people buy what they do and how they buy, the easier it is to sell premium stuff to anybody. The contest we used to have was, let's say the client's getting bids. This is where we make it fun. So instead of it being like most people, they have the attitude when they know that there's been 3 people there and there's a couple more coming, they instantly get a little frustrated and discouraged. So instead of having that attitude, because the attitude is all designed off of your belief, you feel like there's a lot of competition, the client's going to be cheap and they're going to buy on price. Well, that's not how people buy. People buy value. Like 90% of the people that you see would spend more. The only reason why it would ever come down to price is if they truly feel that you are the same as the other companies that came out. That's the only reason why it comes down to price. So to me, make fun of it. And we had contests that was like, if they had 3 estimates, whatever their highest estimate was, we want to see what our X factor can be on top of that. So if their highest bid was $7,000, I want to be able to win this for like a 4X, right? Or a 3X. So we had competitions like that. A 2X is like the minimum. I mean, we should at least be double the price, because the companies are going out there, and again, they're not doing a heat loss, heat gain. They're not doing static pressure. They're not designing systems properly. They're not doing indoor air quality package. None of that. You know, they go out there and it's like the norm. I'm going to get a modulating system with a 2-stage condenser. I'm going to throw it in there cheap. I'm not going to install it properly, and I'm going to see how cheap I can do it for. So I would rather sell a 14 SEER because really, you know, if you understand the difference in efficiencies and return on investment, that's fine, unless we're looking at, you know, humidity challenges down in the south, things like that. But that's how it should be, is have fun with it.
And you're not saying just jack up the price to rip people off. You're talking about adding value, adding more components to the ticket price to increase the ticket price. That's part of the game, not just whatever, you know, you have a $3,000 quote, I'm going to charge you. My goal is to charge you for the same exact system, $15,000 or $20,000.
Yeah, it's definitely about the value. And, you know, when we were talking about the load calculations, and I know a lot of people kind of skip on that, because sometimes some people don't know how to do load calculations. So, you know, like, you know, in ThermoGRID, we built a load calculation program to make it very easy to do them, but it's very, very accurate as well. So you could do what would normally take maybe an hour to do, and you can do it in maybe probably 15 minutes. But the thing about a load calc is, even if that person did one, you know, 20 years ago, the systems don't work the same now. I mean, it's a different efficiency rating, so the output is different. So there's more reasons why you would want to do a load calculation today, even if, and because that's an objection that clients give, like, why do you need to do this? Put the same thing in. Well, we should be able to overcome that and say, well, you know, if you were to look at a car 20 years ago and you look at a car today, I mean, do you think of any differences that are in cars today that wasn't in cars 20 years ago?
Air conditioned seats.
You're right. I mean, so when you look at that, there's huge differences there. The same differences are in our heating and cooling systems today. And it does take figuring out, based on the new standards of what's available, what your home requires now.
Yeah, we see a lot of people change their roof, you know, change their or add spray foam insulation to their roof line, and they don't take those things into consideration whenever they ask that question. Or even what used to be like a sun room in the back, they've closed that off and made that into like a dining room area or something like that, and they just forgot that they did that 5 years ago. And so they didn't take that stuff into consideration. But yeah, adding that value is huge for sure. Whenever you, when you were selling, when you were closing those, you said like 85%?
83.
83%. When you had an 83% close rate, were y'all the cheapest in town?
We were by far the most expensive company in town.
Oh, okay, cool. Because like you said, your percentage goes up when you give things away. That's what I wrote down. It's very easy to make that percentage very high whenever you're giving things away. But
yeah,
cool. So how about number 3?
Number 3, we would go over to the service department. And in that service department, one of the most important things to look at is the conversion ratio at taking older systems and flipping them into sales leads. So the reason why I say that's pretty important is because when companies want to grow, there are ways that you can grow fairly easy and inexpensively when it comes to marketing costs. And most people don't know how to do this, but it's easy to get in the home to do maintenance for somebody, and maybe safety inspections and things like that. So I've shown companies how to do a marketing source that is practically free to do,
really,
to get into a ton of people's homes and actually do the service appointment. Because normally it costs, like, if you look at all the numbers and overhead and everything, about $250 to get in the home is kind of a constant number. So, if you look at that, but you could find a different way of marketing to get in the home, like a Groupon, for instance, or an Angie's List or something like this. And I'm not saying, those bad leads that most people don't like,
Yeah.
The only reason why those could be bad leads is if you can't get them booked to get in the home.
Yeah.
That's the only reason why I would think that there could be a potential bad opportunity there. But if you market for service, that's completely different. You can market in a way where, let's say you have a $189 tune-up super rejuvenation type thing that you're doing, and you're going to do it for $89. So that's the promotion, right? So the perceived value is already there. When the client buys it, you pay Groupon, let's say 40% of that, or $40 or something like that.
Okay.
So you get $40 now to actually go in the home, when normally you spend up to $250 to get in the home. So that's part of the difference right there.
Oh yeah, good point.
But now you're in the home, and as a technician, there's different numbers that wrap around these opportunity calls. So first off, out of all the service calls that are ran, like every single appointment for maintenance and repair, between 30 and 35% of all of the appointments that are ran should be opportunity calls. Now, up in my area, 12 years is the average life of a system. And that's when systems they're kind of older, maybe outdated. Maybe they're going to start nickel and diming the client as far as repairs go. Maybe there's better efficiencies available that could benefit the client. So, down in Florida, we might look at like 10 years and older. In Hawaii, we usually look at like 8 years and older. And so, if you have 30 to 35% of all of the service appointments that you run that are 12 years old, or, based on your area, your number, that's the first KPI that we would like to look at there on that.
That just watching those numbers, are you saying out of the 30, you should be turning over 30 to 35% to the sales department?
Technically, the key performance indicator we're looking at on 12 plus opportunities would be a conversion ratio of 35% or higher. Now, that means that out of all of the ones you ran, 35% bought new systems.
Oh, okay. So these are actually selling new systems to 35% of service calls.
Yeah. And the way that the math works is that, so let's say that our first metrics that we would look at there, we're running, out of 100 service calls ran, 30 of them were 12 years old and older. That's pretty good. We're meeting our expectation. Well, out of all of those that are ran, 50% of them should consider their options. Over half. So over half of those clients should consider their options to look to see what it would be like to get a new system in their home. So half of those, the comfort advisors are going out on. The comfort advisor should be closing about 85% of those. And that's where we get
The
our
30 to
35%
35%.
success rate is what we call it.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, what would you say to a company that's smaller that maybe only have one service tech or two service techs that they don't have a quote unquote comfort advisor that goes out?
Well, even if you don't have a comfort advisor, you would have one of two things. You either should have an owner that would be running these sales leads, or the technician should roll right in and sell these leads.
Okay.
I've seen so many different business structures,
Right.
from being all selling technicians to being all comfort advisors to doing a mix.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way that I've seen to grow very quickly and only have comfort advisors, because there is going to be an influx in leads.
Yeah.
Because maybe we're getting a lot of marketed leads and a lot of tech leads in the summer. That would
Mm-hmm.
make sense.
Yeah. Right. Right.
But we're going to have other seasons that number drops off. So if you have 7 comfort advisors and the leads drop off in half, you're going to have some turnover there and some challenges. So it's always good to make sure that you do have selling technicians.
Cool. And for anybody that's on that's watching us live here, if you have a question about anything that Adam or I say about anything, punch it right there in the chat bar, and I'll be sure to stop and ask those questions. So, have you seen any companies that have gotten large that had no comfort advisors?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
there are successful companies out there that have selling techs, that 100% selling techs.
Yeah, and the thing that you have to look at there, because again, there's pros and cons of everything.
Absolutely.
Usually, the biggest challenge that you have by having a technician roll right in to sell something
Mm-hmm.
is the technician taking enough time to look at everything instead of just selling the furnace or just the air conditioner. Look at the full
You
package.
have that same problem even on a service call, like and that's one of our things. We have our inspection list that I force the guys to check off everything, and they'll go there and it's got a bad capacitor on the outdoor unit, and they're like, "You seriously want me to go inside now and measure static pressure and tell you the amperage on a blower motor? Like, wait a minute now. It was a bad capacitor. I can change this capacitor out and it'll be going good." Like, yes, but when you hook up your gauges or your field piece, your job link probes, and you've put everything into Measure Quick, now you're actually looking at the performance of the equipment versus repairing that immediate problem. And then something that Brian Orr told me a long time ago is something that he tells his techs is, inspect the entire system to help fill the schedule. So complete the schedule out by inspecting the entire system. And what he means by that, and I didn't quote him verbatim, but make sure that you're not burning through calls, because you shouldn't be catching 12 or 15 service calls a day. And if you're catching 12 or 15 service calls a day, you're doing a horrible job on all 12 or 15 service calls.
Yeah.
So inspect the entire system. So really quick, Jeremy Davis, what's up, guys? Jeremy, Jeremy. Adam.
Hi, Jeremy.
He asked a question. How should a service tech handle a replacement opportunity on a service call if not all the decision makers are present? Does he try and sell it on the spot, or does he reschedule it? And that's a really good question. And I have a secondary question to that. If he does that, does that change our call booking percentage, the call center KPI, or no, I'm sorry, the sales KPI, because does that count as 2 leads versus 1, since they have to come back?
Good questions. Very good questions. So when it comes to being out there on a service appointment, I mean, that's a common thing, that either you have no decision makers, you have one decision maker.
Mm-hmm.
So my goal is to always push through when it comes to sales, because something I've always kind of thought is time kills all deals. The more time that passes in between anything, the less opportunity you have. So I think it's good to do everything you can do to push through, but don't do it as like a Hail Mary thinking somebody's going to buy. So what I mean by that is that you got to qualify and ask them, if we were to go through and look at your options today, is this something that you'll be able to kind of choose on your own, or is there anybody that you'll need to relay any information to, such as how efficient the system is, if there's any upgrades that need to be done, where those are put in, how large the investment is?
Mhm.
Do you need to relay any of that to anybody? So that's the question that you want to ask. And if they say, yes, I need to relay the information, I'll be like, okay, so who is that you would relay to? Now, the reason why I start with that question is because just because they have a spouse, it doesn't mean that they're part of the decision-making process.
Absolutely. 100%.
You know, there are some clients that can definitely move forward on their own. They don't need to talk to somebody, but maybe it's not their spouse. Maybe it's the neighbor. Maybe it's their father-in-law.
Yeah. Their
It is
parents or something like that. Yeah.
absolutely.
Or the kids.
So people get frustrated sometimes because they go out on a sales appointment and they thought that they qualified it.
Mm.
And they think, you know, buyers are liars. People say that all the time. And I'm like, you know, I don't think it's that. I think sometimes we're asking the wrong questions and we think we're saying something that we're not really saying. Like if you say, now, does your wife want to be here for the appointment? They're going to say no.
Right.
Nobody wants to be there for the appointment. I mean, come on, who wants to sit around
Guilty.
talking about furnaces?
Right. Yeah.
So no, nobody wants to sit around for the appointment. However, when you rephrase it and you say, will you need to relay any information about the efficiency, the, you know, any challenges or the size of the investment or any of that before you move forward? That's what we want to know. And whoever that is, that's who we need to try to get on the phone right now.
Okay.
That's step one. Try to get them on the phone if you can.
Yeah.
I've done sales presentations right there with one. We're on speakerphone and they're listening to everything. And I keep asking them questions to make sure they're still listening.
Now, I was going to say, now you have the technology of FaceTime or even Zoom on your mobile device, and you can literally do that and create a video at the same time of these things that may be, and I do this and my guys do this also. And it's something that it's just one of those value adders that we do. And that's like, we'll ask that question, does anybody else need to hear any of this information? And they're like, no, I can relay it all. And we all know how the game of telephone plays out. And so instead of relying on them to just share this information with someone else, even if that other person's not a decision maker, we'll just create videos of it. And then we can simply just share that video with them very simply. And then they're like, oh yeah. So now, because even we all know this, like when a client calls in and the CSR answers the phone and the client says something specifically, the CSR types it in or writes it down one way, and the service expert goes back and listens to the call recording through the CRM, and they're like, that is not what they meant, or that you interpreted that completely differently. And they said it and they wrote it down that way that they perceived it, but it's not the right way. And there's so many things that we've caught before even go into a service call, because of the technicians listening to the call before they actually would ride out there. And so doing that video is very helpful. And then having that conversation over Zoom. Does ThermoGRID have any way of helping with the CSR or the call center they recommend? Really quick before we ask that question, I have something else that I thought about, a value adder, really fast. So this right here, this is just a little tidbit of extra for y'all that are listening and watching this. But feel free to steal this idea. And it's not something that I created, but it's something that we use and it's very valuable. And we get a ton of feedback on this, and it's practically free. But this is a floor mat, and this is just a simple logoed floor mat that every service technician, every salesperson, everybody in the company has these floor mats, and we cycle them through. Literally, when I say free, they're like $10 maybe. And that floor mat, everybody puts on booties when you walk in the door, or you're supposed to. But what happens when you walk in the door and when you're putting booties on, all the trash goes somewhere. But if you lay this guy out inside the door and stand on this while you're putting the booties on, and then it's a constant reminder. I can't tell you how many times people are like, wow, that's like really cool, thinking outside the box. Like, now I don't have to worry about sweeping up even the little square of area where you're putting your booties on. And so that's just one extra value adder that you can add to your entire presentation as a service tech and a salesperson. But yeah, the call center area is, is there a way of getting help with the CSRs? If you have questions, like we were saying, like they're maybe putting stuff in wrong or whatever.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is just to know like where you should be as a company, because those are things that will help you understand, is there challenges that you really should be digging into? If you know what their conversion ratios are supposed to be, and having recorded calls, I think is perfect, because then you can just plan it out. Listen to X amount of recordings and spot check to see how they're doing on different types of calls,
Okay.
to make sure they're using the script and building all the value, and doing what they can do to get decision makers there and make sure they have a time commitment and all those things.
Cool.
And one thing I wanted to kind of add to that last thing about
Yeah.
The if you have a technician rolling in and all the decision makers aren't there,
Yeah.
one of the other things that I feel helps significantly is advancing calls. So if you don't have decision makers and you can't get them all available, advance the appointment to a time that you do have them all there, and just build the value at why you need to leave, why you need to come back, what you're going to be able to present at that time. Like, you can use the load calculation, for instance, as your reason for why you would need to come back to price out the proper options to them. But if you advance it to the time that you have all the decision makers there, again, now you have way more opportunity to be able to close this appointment, instead of just waiting to see if they're going to respond to an estimate you throw out there. That is something that, by doing that effectively and doing it well, will add at least 10 to 15% additional to your closing ratio. And when I say 10 to 15%, I mean like going from like 60% to 75%, not like 10% of numbers, like one extra sale.
Yeah.
But it's taking it seriously, because that should be, based on the business model, should be over 80% of your revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at what the majority of your business revenue should be. That's the gold. I mean, that's what we work for with our maintenance agreements and everything else, is to be able to be that company as well that can do the replacement for them.
Yeah, totally. 100%. So that kind of leads into the KPI number 4, which is the install.
Yeah, on the install side of it, the callbacks, I think, are huge.
Oh my gosh,
or at least they shouldn't be huge.
Water leaks, like, just, oh yeah, y'all installed it 2 weeks ago and now we have a water leak. Are you serious? And then they get up there and they didn't glue a drain line. And then like, oh yeah, we went out of town last week and we threw our luggage up there and they knocked the drain line. And then you're like, oh geez, like now we're fixing the ceiling.
Or you just got done with the install today and they called that night, we don't have any hot water. I was like, are you kidding me?
And a disconnect was never put in. Like, are you sure you inspected that system? How was it running after you left?
So the challenge with callbacks on the installation side, now they should be running their own callbacks. Like, number one, like if you really want to make those go away, have them take care of their own mistakes. But I do know a lot of companies that they send their service technicians out because they called in after hours. But to me, again, it's like, no, the end result is I want to reduce my callbacks, which means they need to learn from their mistakes. So if a phone call does come in after hours, how could I still make them learn from their mistakes and service that client after hours? Well, to me, there's going to have to be an on-call rotation for installs. So as a team, they got to take care of their own callbacks, instead of having service technicians do that. Because if you're tying up your service technicians, the ones that are going out on these 12 plus opportunities to generate the leads for sales, well, you're reducing the amount of volume that you can run if you keep sending them back on the install callbacks.
Yeah, and another thing that's really irritating, and what happens is it just ruins your culture whenever you have service techs that eventually they start demeaning the installers, because they're like, this idiot, he left the float switch disconnected or flipped upside down or something like that. And then they start nitpicking every single install they go to, because they're just like, resentment starts building, your culture goes down the tube, and the guys are just like super ticked off. You're like, okay, this crew's doing an install today. That means I'm going to be getting a service call later tonight. Don't make any plans, and then that's just like I said, the culture just goes down the tube. And I agree with you 100%. What would you say to someone who has a technician or an installer that when they do that callback, they go out to do that callback that evening, the next day they're trashed? Like, it's just it turns into like they do a callback on Monday, the rest of the week is just horrible, other than replacing them, because sometimes that has to happen.
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's different sides of why challenges happen.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the mistakes that are basically just lack of care.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe we have lack of skill, possibly in an area.
Yeah,
So
that's good.
I think that it should be looked at as being a very, very important KPI in a company. The number should be less than 5% for installs. So out of all the installs that are done each month, less than 5% should have callbacks.
Now, how long do you qualify it as a callback, and are there certain qualifications that make it a callback? Because let me give you a for instance. A week shy of 1 year, we get a call, and the plenum has fallen off of an air handler. And when you climb up in the attic, it's a little old lady, and you look up there and you're like, this has probably been off for like a month or 2 months maybe. And is that considered a callback, or is it like, okay, at 90 days, you're no longer liable for your callbacks?
I think it should be very easy for a company to go a full year without a challenge of any kind. I mean, I've seen systems that a year and a half later, it's still, even though you define it as 1 year, it's still a callback. So to me, I think that if somebody wants to be a good business and take care of their clients, just say, guarantee your work that if anything happens in this amount of time, we'll take care of it. And especially if you installed an air handler and the plenum's off. I mean,
that's an obvious one. Yeah, for sure. I mean, but I think like a less obvious one would probably be like Ameristars. Like, I don't even think they're in business anymore. Actually, I know it's not. It was a train, like cheap brand of train. Ingersoll Rand had it, and it was basically a Medea from China, system. And we were putting them in for property management companies, and we had one where we installed it in October, call it September of 1 year. June the next year, we got a call that it was not working properly. As soon as it went into cooling mode, it was weird. We didn't have it was a cool winter. And then the house was vacant for a few months while they were changing renters or something. Perfect storm scenario. They get in there, they crank it up, and we're like, man, this thing it is not acting right. And the service tech that went out, he called me and he's like, man, this is like the weirdest thing in the world. This doesn't make any sense. I'm like, I agree. It doesn't make any sense. Call tech support, train tech support. They work on trains, but because it was owned by Ameristar was owned by Ingersoll Rand. They were like working through the process, but it was one of those situations where like, man, it sounds like you don't have a piston in it. Like, nah, because we installed this and it's been, we installed it 8 months ago, 9 months ago. There's no way it's run this long and ain't had a piston in it for the indoor unit. And he's like, yeah, take it apart and see if it has a piston in it. And he pulled it off and there was no piston in it. There was no metering device on the cooling side of it. And so would you qualify that as a callback on installer?
So a callback to me is there's a challenge.
So sorry to interrupt you. The reason I asked this is because in my philosophy, they should be testing it in heating and cooling, even if they install it during the heating season.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's your take on that?
So yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, there should be a checklist that every installer has.
Yeah.
And part of the checklist, it's making sure like all the basics, right? We lit the water heater if needed, or we turn this on, or, we swept up the floor. They should check all these things off. But to me, if it's an installation issue, meaning if you should be starting the system up and running a full cycle
Yeah.
of everything that you do. And if you do that and you're actually testing the system, you would be able to identify those types of challenges. So to me, that is an installation issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a part failure, because one way or another, the easiest way to define a callback is, can you charge for it? So you're either charging the client or you're charging the warranty company
Mm-hmm.
for it, So if you can't charge for the work because it's something that you guys overlooked or missed, that's a callback.
Mm.
And I think that integrity plays into that too, because
Absolutely.
anybody can go out and try to charge a client, but I mean, like, ethically charge a client, because it's something different than what you guys did, a completely different area, something you didn't touch, or maybe a part failed. Maybe they don't have a warranty. Well, you got to fix the part. See, part failure is not a callback. You can't control, whether parts are failing or not.
Unless you installed it extremely poorly and you're like, are you serious? I don't know how it lasted as long as it did.
Right. Yeah. If you look at your static pressure being ridiculously high, and we have some parts that are, So, I mean, that's what I think the most important thing people should do is actually put in paper, like, a definition of a callback in their company, because there should be no question. Like, when you go out to a call, the call center should know without a doubt, because we know how technicians are. I mean, they're going to be like, oh, that's not me. That shouldn't be a callback. And they'll make the case, especially if you start measuring it, right? Because when you start measuring these things, people start to look at them and they start to focus on them, and they care about them. They want their numbers to be good. So they'll defend themselves in certain areas, but the clearer you have things defined, the easier it is to manage these kind of KPIs.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then also we didn't talk about it in the service department, but do you have a roundabout idea of what a service tech's callback percentage should be in the range of? Because we've always done like 7 to 10%, like
for service.
Yeah.
Typically the goal would be 1% for service.
Okay, so our service techs suck. So no, I'm just kidding.
Well, I started with a lot of companies when working with them with the software or on the coaching side. And I've seen companies up to 30, 35% on callbacks, which is like, if you think about that, look at all that lost revenue right there. I mean, it's ridiculous. So we put a little bit of focus on this. We make a checklist first, because by making the checklist, all of like the ridiculous callbacks are gone. They went away. Yeah. So now we start getting into like tech training. Like, what do we need to train them on in the installation department to prevent this, or the service department to prevent these common things? Because to me, it's like the law of vital few, right? The 80-20 rule.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Where you can fix maybe 20% of these challenges, and in overall 80% of these callbacks go away, or something like that. So, but 1% is really what the target should be on the service side of it, because these are the technicians. These are the ones that do this on a daily basis.
These are the
they should
experts.
Be able to identify all of those things.
Yeah, 100%. I will preface that none of our employees had experience before they started with us.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. So we have gone through tech training and that type of stuff. And so that's why we've always kind of kept it at like 7%. Like, that's our goal, was 7%, because we hire based on personality. And so Nate asked, how long do we hold the service tech or a service expert liable for or responsible for their callbacks?
1 year.
1 year. Okay. So and on that note, if they work on the condensing unit and something in the air handler breaks, is that considered a callback?
Well, if something breaks, and it's a part related, that again is a failure in a system.
Right. But so what if they did not inspect the entire system when they were on site, and then 2 weeks later, they're calling because it's out of refrigerant or something, it's something else, and it was a blatantly obvious issue?
Yeah, to me, like, let's say filter, that's an easy one, right? So they didn't look at the filter. They're on the outside condenser. They're doing the full maintenance on it. And then the filter gets pulled into the motor. I mean, that's a callback.
Right.
Because on a basic level, anybody should go in and look at the full system, because for safety, I mean, that's like one of the primary reasons why you go out there, is to make sure that the system is safe, make sure that there's no evident challenges. And if if a filter is going to get pulled into a motor because it's all plugged up a week or a month later,
Mm-hmm.
then that should have been prevented. It should have been caught.
Yeah, 100%. And not only that, you obviously didn't measure static pressure on the system. So, and you can only imagine what it probably did to the motor, if it was like that for a year or 2 years. And like, so we've gone into houses where we're changing out a system next week, and they have a mini split that was installed 3 years ago. And they say, well, how often do you clean the filter? Because it's just one of those pull and clean ones. And they're like, it has a filter? Like,
Yeah.
okay. We'll clean that for you when we do that change out.
So you guys hear that down there too, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about it is like, it's even selling. So we sell the April Air whole home air filtration systems, and you have to preface that conversation with, because typically they'll say you replace the filter twice a year, and you have to preface that conversation with, if it's sitting really low on the ground, you have hardwood floors, 6 dogs and 14 kids, like, we're not going to be able to get a year out of this filter. We're not going to get 6 months out of this filter. You're going to be changing this out a lot. So it's just one of those conversations. You have to CYA at the same time as, educate the client.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Jeremy asked again, are we recommending Jeremy ask another question? He didn't ask the same question twice. Sorry about that. Jeremy asked, are we recommending a checklist for repair calls?
Yeah.
I do. We do. And my guys, they'll scream at me constantly. But yeah, I make them, and because for me, it's a presentation, it's a value adder to the client. And we actually will show them, like, and we can also track the trends also. So we have a checklist that's amps on the indoor blower, a picture of the indoor coil, like static pressure measurements. And so if you go to the same client over the period of several years, you could technically trend it out if you were seeing a problem, and then you can go back and look at the last technician's information also. And we do a lot of that through MeasureQuick.
Yeah. We have checklists in ThermoGRID. Like, there's one that's 186 point inspection. And the whole point of a checklist is to make sure that the technician remembers all of the things they should check, because it doesn't matter how good you are, how long you've been doing it, life happens. And, if you're short on time and you're rushed or whatever, I mean, these things happen, and then you may not be thinking quite clearly about what you really need to do and look everything over. I mean, how many people listening right now, I mean, has ever forgot something, like forgot your keys, your wallet, your phone, and you had to go back and get it, right? So if you forget something like that and it happens to you guys, well, it's happening to your technicians too.
Yep.
So a checklist is just an easy way to go through to make sure that you're being thorough, because again, that checklist right there is going to help prevent callbacks.
Yep.
And building a checklist, I think, is one way to build it is just look at your callbacks. Like, what was the reason for the callback? Make sure that's on your checklist.
Absolutely. And one of the things that on ours, one of the things that I have our guys do is they take their keys, because they all have the little clasp that goes around their belt buckle for their keys that their keychains hang on. And I always, when they pull a disconnect, I make them pull their keys out and put them on top of the disconnect. It's like, granted, you're supposed to check the system to make sure it's cooling properly after you've changed the compressor out or you've done whatever, but you may pull that disconnect. And then, like, we've had that call. We haven't had it in a couple years now, but back a couple years ago, I got that phone call like 3 times one summer, and I was like, how does this happen? I haven't had this phone call 3 times in 15 years. And now this summer we've had it 3 times. I was like, y'all are going to put your keys on top of the disconnect from now on, every time you go to a job. And so we did away with that. And that's exactly like you're saying, like, what are you getting calls for that are nuisance, and add that to the checklist. I would preface that if you want it to be completed every time, I wouldn't do 186 points every single service call, but
yeah, that's furnace, air conditioner, boiler, thermostat,
gotcha.
humidifier.
Even like ours, we had like 20 checkpoints, and the guys, they would be taking pictures of floorboards, like instead of evap coils. It's like they're filling out an invoice, and they're like, oh yeah, I forgot to take a picture of the evap coil, and they're like, click and take a picture. I mean, it was just the most random things. And if you want it done right and you want it done consistently, but we also have a culture where we will call each other out and joke with each other a ton, and it's just one of those things that we've developed, thankfully. And so it becomes like, you share in Slack a screenshot of, what is this a picture of, and then you're like, oh yeah, I forgot, and I didn't want to get back in the attic. And then so they publicly have to admit that they forgot, and we're too lazy to get back in the attic to do X, Y, and Z. But yeah, it's one of those things where checklists, I believe, are really good for consistency. Not only that, and consistency of service, or consistency of care is what my wife says. She's a nurse, and so she's like that care continuity. And so people feel, okay, so they don't want just Justin, they want all of our company, because Justin does it great. But if you get Justin, and he's doing it by this checklist or this procedure or the SOP, then Chris is doing it by the SOP, and Don's doing it by the SOP. It doesn't matter which technician goes out there, they're getting the same level of service.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's
cool. Really quick, okay, C. Richard asked, does ThermoGRID break down KPIs for different marketing types?
Yes. Yeah. So there's tracking numbers that you can get. So automatically when the client calls in, the client will be pulled up, and it will tell you what marketing source that number is tied to.
Yeah.
And then you can pull reports of revenue as well.
Yeah. And also one of the things that I think is really awesome is that it will show you the history of the dollar spend on a piece of equipment. So that's just a mind blower for me, because it's a report that I've asked for previously somewhere else forever. And there was no workaround for it. And then it's no brainer, and it pops up right there for the CSR to see, yeah, you spent $11,000 on this unit was manufactured in 1983. Are you sure you want a service expert, or should we send a salesperson? Like it's that you had that mental conversation with yourself, and it's really cool that you're able to track it that way, and it's easy to watch and find it. So, is there anything? Oh, hang on. I missed another one from C. Richard. Can you set expectations regarding CPIs or KPIs in ThermoGRID and see which departments or techs are exceeding or not living up to those expectations, such as callbacks and average ticket prices?
Yeah, so you can do that by individual, actually. So what we have in our system is tech levels, we call them. And so in each department you have, each employee you can assign to a certain level. So let's say in the call center, we have a level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 CSR.
Okay.
And dispatcher. So if they're level 8, their expectations are really, really high.
Yes.
On what the conversion ratio should be, how many memberships they should be selling and converting, versus somebody that's just starting as a level 1. So there's a little bit of leniency there in their KPIs right away. So same thing with service technicians, comfort advisors. There's different levels for each, and it will show you the red, yellow, green, meaning red is they're below the expectation, yellow means they're above expectation but below their goal for their level, and then green is that they're above their goal for their level. So when you look at the dashboard in our system, the daily management report, by individual, you can see red, yellow, green, which is reflecting their level they're assigned to.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that was exactly what I thought when we started that conversation was, do you hold a super green guy to the same level of percentages to the guy that's been here for 20 years, and it's like, that's how you make somebody quit really fast, especially if you make it public.
Yeah, I mean, you want them to see it. You want them to know where they're going, because, if you want to be, at this result here in the future, you got to start doing things that will get you there.
Mhm.
But holding somebody that kind of expectation, there's no way to be out of the gates and know everything
Mhm.
full circle
Do
to be
you
able.
ever does any of your clients ever, or do you know if they ever like correlate pay raises to that percentage? And then if you get a pay raise, then you're going to bump up to this next technician. So you're like, okay, yeah, I don't mind giving you a pay raise. It's, $5 an hour, whatever it is. Um, when I give you this raise, you're going to bump up to a technician level, you're going to bump up a tech level. So now your KPIs move up. So now you're going to be held to a higher standard at that same pay rate.
Yeah, that's what it's designed for. Because one of the challenges I ran into is a manager was people always asking for raises. Well, I've been here a year. I'm like, I don't care how long you've been here. That doesn't mean you get
Right.
a raise,
Right. Right.
So what I wanted to do was create an easy way where I could tell people that they can make as much as they want. I'm
Mhm.
not going to hold them back. They can do it in a week. They can do it in a month, a year, whatever time frame they want to achieve it, they can. But it shows them like what they have to do to be able to achieve that. So for me, if somebody's achieving the KPIs, now I give them the raise.
Mhm.
And I like doing it that way because if I give them the raise and now I have to hold them to it, I know that there's probably going to be some critical conversations that are going to take place because they haven't really figured out how to make it happen yet. But
Okay.
if they achieve it first, and let's call it a benchmark, like
Yeah.
if you get to this average ticket, this conversion ratio on selling maintenance contracts, and this conversion ratio on 12 plus, well, now you're a level 2 technician and you're going to make this much. And then when you get to this key performance,
Okay. So you're saying before you give them the raise, they need to meet the KPI minimum for the next level up service tech.
yeah.
Oh, I like that. So
Once they
yeah.
achieve it, they manage it for, let's say, typically what I do is I say they got to do it for 2 months. So they do it for 1 month because anybody can like have a fluke and like
Oh, right. Yeah.
have awesome attitude and
Yep.
make things happen. But when you can recreate success a second month, then you know that they know how to recreate this level.
Yeah.
And now they've earned the right to be at that level and be under these expectations. So it's a different way of thinking to have people know exactly what to do to get wherever they want to be, not
Yeah.
hold it back at all and say, hey, you achieve this, any of these levels,
Yeah.
you earned it.
Here's your roadmap to success, and if you want to follow it, here it is. And if you don't follow, and it does away with the blame game, like, oh, so and so's like he sucks, but he makes double the money I do. You're like, obviously he doesn't suck because he's meeting the KPIs. And then like instantly I was thinking the opposite, and what the way that I had it in my mind, it was going to be a constant coaching on my behalf, where I was saying, I'll bump you up, but now you have to meet these standards, whereas you're saying meet the standards and I'll bump you up. I like that. That's really cool. That's great insight. um cool. We have gone a little bit over time. I think that there's a ton of value, but if you don't mind coming on the show again in the future and answering some of these, because I know we're going to have some other questions, but in that meantime, how can these people, other than Jeremy, because I know he knows how to get in touch with you, how can they get in touch with you and learn more about everything that we can do?
I think one way would be you can contact us on either Facebook or our website is thermogrid.org. ThermoGrid is ThermoGrid.com.org. Either one of those will take you to the same place.
Okay.
But you can contact us on our website. And, if anybody is interested in some of the metrics that we have, there's a lot of metrics in a business. There's a lot of KPIs, and all of them kind of work together to
Mhm.
achieve the same outcome. So if anybody's interested, I'd be happy to send out the metrics for anybody that requests it.
And not only that, if you want real-time inventory management that job costs, like, this is where you go. Like, it's not a 90% thing. It's like, if you want it to job cost every single job and, show you your inventory, your tracking, it's honestly, it's a no-brainer, and there's no extra charge for it. So
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's what ThermoGrid's for, is just to make sure that
all of these things that you have are easily managed,
Yeah.
because we know they're important, but sometimes the challenge is being able to find out how to get the numbers and how to calculate them, and so on and so forth. But we definitely have it laid out full circle, and then we can coach people on how to get everything implemented and succeed.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that part, but we'll talk about that next time.
Yeah.
That's another rabbit hole we can dive in for a couple hours. Cool, Adam. I appreciate it, man. And I know that everybody joining us and watching appreciates it as well. And we had some internet problems with Facebook Live, but I'll share this on Facebook, and then also I will share this on YouTube and through the podcast. And what I was getting at is I'll put this in the show notes for everything, and everywhere that I post it. And don't hesitate to reach out to Adam and his team. They tons of knowledge. So it's really, really good stuff. But if you have any questions, please reach out to us. And thank you, everyone, for watching and listening to the Service Business Mastery Podcast. And I'm Tersh, the host, and Adam with ThermoGRID. And until next time, we'll talk again soon.
Thanks.